Hey everyone, it's Lisa with Are You My Cousin? And it's Thursday, so it's time for more genealogy talk this week. And as you can see, it is DNA. I'm going to call it DNA Thursday, I guess. We have Mary Eberle of DNA Hunters here with us for our monthly chat of all about DNA. And so Mary is my go-to person when it comes to DNA because, as you guys know, while I love genealogy and I'll research a lot of places and a lot of strange places, I don't know much about DNA. I know enough to get myself kind of going, but I don't know all the ins and outs, and because it really is a subspecialty. So welcome. If you are coming, thank you so much for joining us. If this is our first time meeting, I am Lisa Listen. I have the website Are You My Cousin, over where I share how-tos and tutorials on genealogy research. So would love for you to join me over there. Would love for you guys to also take note that today, or this week, not today, this week, we have launched a summer road trip series with FindMyPast. And what we are doing is we are literally taking a virtual road trip through the US records at FindMyPast. This week and next week, our first stop is actually in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I'll put a link to that blog post down in my down in the comments for you guys. Okay, let me grab that link. And so what we do is we are focusing on genealogy research in the Cincinnati, Ohio area. We recently did a Facebook Live with Jen Baldwin of FindMyPast, where we talked all about Ohio and Cincinnati research. So you guys are welcome to go back and see that. It is actually over on the Are You My Cousin Facebook page. So you can find it there, or the FindMyPast page. It's there. It's got some I learned a ton of stuff. Actually, I found records, and as we would go through, and I was kind of going down the rabbit holes after that live was over, because as Jen and I talk, we tend to kind of spark ideas in each other every time we talk. And so I found more records I didn't even know existed over there. So we are doing that. So it's 2 weeks in each stop. We've got 4 stops. Be sure and watch your emails. Be sure and watch the Facebook page, because you'll find things out about. We have some giveaways and some fun things, just some fun things to do. So I'd love for you to join us on that. The other thing I wanted to share with you guys, this was new. I thought this was an incredible idea. It is called Help Us Find George. And this is a summer mystery. It's kind of I guess you call it a little mystery that Vivid-Pix is actually hosting. And it's a way to go through the records, and they have questions. So it's kind of like a mystery puzzle that you can use using photographs that they share with you to solve a genealogy problem. It's really cool. So I wanted to pop that down in the link for you. Pop that in the comments for you as well, because it'll be a ton of fun to do. It's called Help Us Find George. I do not know who George is off the top of my head, but here's a link to that if you want to check it out. It just looks like a fun thing to do. It might be fun with the kids or something like that. So what I will tell you guys is that I am an affiliate, just full disclosure, for both FindMyPast and for Vivid-Pix. So let's see who else here today, Mary. We got Hey Flo, Mountain, Oregon. Hey Deb, good to see you again this week. Oh, hey, Mary Jane from Pennsylvania. Yay. I hope those of you, hey, Danya, you're probably like me and getting rain today with Elsa, that tropical depression, or I don't know what it is now, coming through. So it's definitely a rainy, cloudy day here. Anyway, so welcome. Glad you guys are here. So let's get to it, guys. That's all the announcements I have this week, guys. Always seems to like there's something going on, right, Mary?
Yep, always.
So Mary is here. We're going to talk about doing DNA case studies, which I thought was a really interesting topic. It's not one I probably have ever done, not something I've really even thought of that much, Mary, to be quite honest. I think I've done case studies, on paper records, but not necessarily because I don't do a ton of DNA myself. So I think that's really interesting. And so I wanted you to kind of share, if you don't mind, a little bit about why do a case study, and kind of what would we learn from it? What would it teach?
Mm-hmm. Okay, sure. And thanks for having me, Lisa. It's great to be here. Hello to all of the readers of yours. And so case studies, I think, are really useful, and for a number of reasons. And they include just being able to see those steps that I have had to go through in order to solve a case. And, I think it's great for beginners because you can see what's possible, that you can actually find people. And it's really good for intermediate level people because, they're seeing the steps and they can go back to their own research and, think about these steps. And then, even for the advanced learner, I think it's really important because there's certain things that come up in probably every case where you might have heard about something in the past, but you just didn't think about it. And then you see it in the case study, and it gives you a new idea for going back and analyzing your work. Maybe you can make more progress because now you've got this new idea.
Mm-hmm. That's actually a really good point. It to me sort of seems to me a little bit when you're doing the case study, almost like when I build a timeline out, because I go back to the beginning and I just keep reviewing each thing, which allows me to sometimes see gaps. And my thinking is that's as you build that case study out, it would allow you to see perhaps a gap in your research with that. Do you use a certain tool to do that, or do you just write it out? Do you have a template that you typically use, or?
Well, I present using PowerPoint. So, the basic structure is to give some background. And so that includes basically the information that I was presented with. So maybe the person's age, what they're looking for, which person. So that could be a parent or a grandparent, or sometimes somebody even further back in time. And then, let's take the case of a parent. Then I'll find out when they were born. So when the potential client was born, where they were born, and then also where have they done DNA testing. So a lot of times people have tested just at one company, and I might start out by recommending testing at other companies. It depends upon where they've tested. And then like in the case of an unknown birth father, it can be really important to have half siblings test or their mother test, because then you're able to sort out their matches into these are from the mom and then these are from the birth father.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So what kind of mysteries or what kind of genealogy mysteries do you typically create case studies for? Or do you create a case, whether you present on it or not, do you create a case study basically for each research project?
So with that last question, I would say, as I'm doing research, I'm reaching out to my client and saying, here's what happened, here's what I found. Do you know more about this? Can you reach out to your match and ask them this question, or should I ask them that question? So we've got this email exchange of, between the client and me. And so I'm slow, kind of building the record.
Right.
And then in the case of a presentation, it's really nice if in the end I sent them a full explanation, of what, let's say things went really quickly and there's just kind of the one big email that explains everything. Then, I'm stepping through, this is what I did and this is the conclusion I came to, and then, the next step, and and what's really nice for creating case studies is I've got that record either in that condensed, here's everything that, here's how it went, or I did one just this week for the DNA Hunter Society where there was a very long email exchange where, going through all the steps and going off on some tangents. And, things like that. So, but it was really nice to have that record, because otherwise you're just like you're looking at the answer, and then, sometimes I'm scratching my head thinking, well, how did I do that? How did I come to that conclusion?
It reminds me a little bit of when early in my years of researching, especially when I got to, the tougher ancestors, because it doesn't take long for any of us to hit a tough ancestor out there when it comes to researching. I started writing reports to myself. So I would literally write a report on that ancestor to myself. And it's really helpful, like you said, because if you get something that takes a long time, then I would go back to that, and I would, have it all laid out, and I wasn't having to, it was just myself. I wasn't really having to go places, but because I had it all written up, it would keep me on track going forward, and it would explain kind of why I thought what I did. So that was always kind of a neat thing. And I think that sounds kind of what some of your long emails might be a little bit when it comes to doing that. So let me ask you a question. This is a little aside thing, but because obviously you do client work and you're working with others. So if do you ever use a tool called Slack or something? It's like almost an instant messaging type thing, but you can add files, and it pulls you out of those long strings of emails. I think I have 40 in one of my email strings, and I can't find anything anymore. So I didn't know if you ever use a tool like that. That's something you don't have to be a researcher, professional researcher do that. Anybody who's working with somebody else on a project can use a tool like Slack or something that they would go through. Do you ever do that? Or is it just, I know that was kind of an out of the left field question.
No, that's a great question. I haven't used Slack. There are a couple of times when I used Facebook Messenger with a client. It seemed like that was the quickest way to reach them, and that seemed to be their preferred way of communicating. And so I would say that's the only other method I can think of. Well, and picking up the phone, of course. Usually if there's a big breakthrough or a big, huge discovery, which can be good or bad, then it's the phone.
Oh, that makes sense. I just was thinking as you were talking about building the case and getting them to do things for because you're working hand in hand oftentimes with your clients as far as because they need to get information to you. Sometimes they have it probably and just don't know what they have. I would assume sometimes. So that makes sense to do. So what's been one of your favorite mysteries that you've solved building case studies around?
Well, let's see. I think I talked about this case here on your channel, but I did find the birth father of my mother's first cousin. So my first cousin once removed, and that was really neat because I had that personal connection to her. Yeah. And so that made it really special. And I've had a couple of Canadian cases that have been really interesting. One out of London, so a woman that was born in London, and I think it's interesting to do the work in those other countries, and it's all from my home or wherever I am. As long as I'm online, I can work. Right. So I would say one that I wasn't able to fully bring to fruition, unfortunately. It involved an adoptee in Canada who believed that he had been sold as a baby. Oh. Right. And that.
Yeah, we hear those stories. I know, just as you said that, immediately I'm thinking there was one in New York. There's stories in Georgia, Tennessee. I've heard all three of those places just right off the top of my head. So yeah, wow.
Right. So, people find themselves really wanting a baby, and this was in the 40s. Yeah. And at least in Canada, you could not adopt outside your religion. Okay. And his parents were Jewish, and there weren't very many Jewish babies available to adopt. And in that situation, there were a group of lawyers and doctors who saw that there was an excessive supply of Catholic babies, and they set up a black market baby ring where they sold the Catholic babies to the Jewish parents, and took care of all the paperwork. And
wow.
So, and the government shut them down, and a few years later they restarted it.
Wow.
So just amazing. I think that was so that for the client, it was in the 1940s, and they might have restarted. Maybe it was 5 years later, or whenever they had served their time or recruited more people. And yeah, just stuff like that where you would never, imagine that things like that happened.
Yeah. And what kept you from solving that one case? Was there something in particular that that listeners can be aware of so they can be aware of, because not everything, I'm assuming not everything is solvable. We like to think it is, but is that a correct assumption?
Right. You're absolutely right. Like you can't solve a lot of, so let's say somebody adopts a baby from China, and then if they came to me and said, we want to find the birth parents of the child that we adopted, I would decline, just because through DNA, there just aren't enough people from China or of Chinese descent who've done testing in order to solve the case in the majority of the instances.
Okay.
Once in a while we hear about stories like there were, I think, 2 Korean sisters who found each other. So they're of Korean descent. They both ended up in the United States, and through DNA testing, they found each other.
Right. Yes, I do remember that story, definitely. But so really, it's sometimes it is a matter of, so the case of the adoptee where you weren't able to solve it, does that leave the door open for in the future being able to, if the right person tests or somebody tests that matches, that could lead to a conclusion eventually? It's just kind of a not right now type of thing.
Right. And I'm sorry, I didn't answer the question.
I took you off on a whole different thing.
Why? How come I was unable to find the birth father? And that is so. In this case with the Canadian Catholic babies, the vast majority of them were French Canadian. Okay. And that can be a tough nut to crack because there's a lot of endogamy there. But for this person, his heritage was Ukrainian Orthodox.
Okay.
So how many people of that descent have done DNA testing? Either in Ukraine or in Canada or the United States. I can tell you a lot of people in Ohio who have that heritage have done testing. Okay. A few in Canada, and then of course a bunch like in Eastern Europe. But then we've got the lack of the trees that go far enough back in time to figure out who the common ancestor is, and records were destroyed. The Ukraine was invaded by the Nazis. All this stuff, that make things really hard to do. The language difference.
Definitely.
At one point, I had I was looking through, is it the Druin collection? And those are French records. So I was looking through French documents, and the names were all in Ukrainian. Okay. And I don't remember if they were Cyrillic or not, but I had Russian in college, so I can decipher a little Cyrillic. But And my client spoke French. But like, I was just like, oh my gosh, like I was trying to see if the baby had been baptized, because I think the Druin collection, it's predominantly Catholic records.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, okay, and I could see that the home for unwed mothers that he was born at,
Mm-hmm.
there were some of those records were in the collection.
Oh, wow.
But just like seeing what, was he baptized in the Catholic Church before they turned him over to the lawyers and doctors that sold him, or, just, it was, difficulties like that.
Definitely. I'm trying to find the link for that. I'm going to drop that because I know folks may not be as familiar with it. So I'm going to grab a link for that, guys. And here's a good link article about it. So
about that collection.
Yeah, about that collection, because not everybody's familiar with that. So I think let me make sure I spell it right.
And somebody asked, did you try DNA for this client? So yes, that's how I learned that his heritage was Ukrainian Orthodox.
Mm-hmm.
He had second cousin matches that went back to the Ukraine, and the what do you call them? Ecclesial, the church records.
Oh, the ecclesiastical.
Those records were in the Orthodox Church. So typically the Ukrainian Orthodox, sometimes it was the Greek Orthodox Church. Mm-hmm. I think when immigrants originally came from the Ukraine to the United States or Canada, if there wasn't a Ukrainian Orthodox community there yet, mm-hmm. They would find the next closest thing, which was the Greek Orthodox Church.
Oh, okay.
In many instances. And, I learned a lot about immigration from Ukraine to the New World. And, I talked to 2 Ukrainian priests in the Cleveland area. Mm-hmm. So Parma is a big center. And, I did a lot. But those DNA matches just weren't close enough. And then if they're not so close, then you need the tree to go back further.
Right.
Things like that. And people unwilling to do testing.
Mm-hmm.
So, just tough.
Well, you brought up something I just wanted to point out in the sense that you said, you had learned a lot about the Ukrainian immigration. You had talked with the 2 Ukrainian priests or clergy. That is so important, and it is, we talk a lot about, everybody who listens to me for any amount of time knows I'm going to talk about social history and understanding. We have to get into our ancestors' heads and understand why they did what they did. And, that's exactly what you did by learning about Ukrainian immigration and going out and talking to the clergy, because they have that unique insight that you might not. Maybe you read about those records online, or maybe you read that, but it didn't click because you didn't have the background, and they can put it in a better context. So kudos to you for finding finding folks to talk to, because I think that is so crucial in what we do, and that I don't want to miss clues because I don't seek out somebody with more knowledge on a particular area, because we can't be experts in it and everything. Definitely.
So, there was one of the priests told me that there was an orphanage where the current Ukrainian History Museum was. So on the same site. So I talked to a researcher there, and because I thought, wow, well, maybe they have the orphanage's records.
Yeah.
And maybe this baby went through that orphanage. Mm-hmm. And, so that was one thing. I mean, this is really a fun conversation because here I thought like, oh, I wouldn't want to talk about this because I couldn't solve it, right? Like that's frustrating to me and frustrating to the client, I'm sure. But at the same time, like I had those two things, talking to the museum, talking to the priest, and then also a woman wrote her dissertation on that black market baby scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to her, I think we emailed, and I said, because I thought, since he had all these DNA matches in Cleveland, I thought that maybe a Ukrainian woman from Cleveland had gone to Montreal and given birth there, and then the baby remained in Montreal.
Right.
And in contrast, what I read about this black market baby trade was that that if anything, the babies were going the other way. That this Canadian black market baby scheme was supplying Jewish families in the United States.
Wow.
So, it was interesting to say to her, well, have you found other Ukrainian Orthodox babies? And of course, one thing I didn't say was they have a relationship to the Catholic Church.
Okay.
Right? Like the Eastern Orthodox Church, whether it be the Russian Orthodox or the whatever, the Orthodox churches are related to the Catholic Church, historically. And I think I just lost my train of thought, but
that's okay.
Just like, she knew, I think, she knew, she was an expert. She wrote a book, and it's like this really thick book that I tried to chase down in Florida, and then I tried to chase down here because it was like, you could buy it on Amazon, but it was $80. But, I thought like, oh my gosh, this woman did her dissertation on this black market baby scheme. She is going to be a great resource. And, she said, I've never heard of babies, of mothers from the United States going into Canada. And I've never heard of, I don't really know of any other Ukrainian babies, Ukrainian Orthodox that, she had seen the French Catholic babies.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, but I can see what you're saying. Yeah. You made a good point. You talked about the Ukrainian History Museum on top of the orphanage, which I thought which is something that I think we as researchers forget sometimes, that we need to make sure we're remembering that museums are actually repositories. They have researchers, they have records, so I would encourage anybody to reach out to, a museum in the area. So, I do a lot of obviously North Carolina research here in Wake County. And so, we have a fabulous museum that I need to get to. It's the Raleigh City Museum, and they'll have information on things in Raleigh. And where they're really helpful is when you're trying to find out about different events or, historical or economic events for certain time periods. So I would encourage you guys to make sure you're reaching out to the local or state level librarians, or history museums, because they have a lot of good information, and they're more than willing to talk to you about it. So yeah, perfect.
Yeah, excellent point.
Yeah. I thought you made an interesting thing. You said, you didn't know that talking about not solving a case would be so interesting. It's really frustrating for us. I think we as genealogy researchers feel like everything should be solvable. And it is, especially when we're doing it for client work. And the reality is not everything is solvable. What we're doing is an exhaustive search. But I think we learn a lot by talking about the ones that we don't solve. I think there's a lot of good concepts, just like we've talked about what you did. And while it didn't solve your question, it's great reminders and new information for people to be able to include in their research. Definitely. So now I'm like, that sounds really interesting. Ukrainian research. Actually, it made me have a really good thought. Actually, two thoughts. You said from religious records that if a group, say Ukrainian, if they migrated and immigrated to an area that did not have their religion or their church, that people typically went to something that was close. And that's a really good thing for me to remember, quite frankly. And because I've had that case come up on a research project of my own that I'm working on. And I thought, I can't understand. I just couldn't get it, because I thought they were Catholic, but I keep finding them in these little, basically primitive Baptist churches. And I'm like, okay, well, honest, that was really all that was out there, or something like that. Maybe that's why they're there, is because there just isn't anything else that was as close as they could get. So that's a good reminder to me on that part too. So I'm excited. Yeah. See, I always have good ideas when I talk with you. I'm like,
right. And now I'm tempted to go back in to see, like, did he get any better DNA matches? I do that once in a while. I haven't touched a case for a year. I just look to see, what's happened. And, because you're right. Like, if you ultimately get a really close match, then that can be the breakthrough that you needed. But just, when you were doing it a year ago or 2 years ago, that match just wasn't in there. And, you don't have enough pieces of the puzzle to solve it.
Yeah, I think sometimes genealogy is a waiting game for us. It's a waiting game for DNA matches. It's a waiting game for records to be digitized or made, or it's a waiting game for them to even be made public. I think it's just sometimes it's hard because we want to be able to do it right away. But in reality, there is a lot in genealogy that is a waiting game for us. I think, which kind of always keeps us in it and keeps our hands in it, which is nice.
Right.
Which
right,
I really like. So anyway, Mary, why don't you share with folks about what you've got coming up on the 14th of July?
Sure. Okay. Well, on the 14th of July at 2 o'clock Central, so 3 Eastern, for those of you in Lisa's time zone, I'm going to do a standalone case study, and it's open to the public. I'm offering people a $5 discount with the Lisa code in the coupon code. And
hang on, guys. I'll put that in my printer. Oops, I forgot to put that in there for you.
So, I've been doing these case studies in the DNA Hunters Society, and that's the membership. And we're at the point in the membership where I'm saying to them, well, what do you want next? And a lot of people have been saying, I want more case studies. And so I can see the value, and I can see that people are excited. And, it's just been really fun to share these with people. And, there've been case studies that I have seen, so for example, CeCe Moore had that TV program called Genetic Detectives. And she had 5 different cases that she solved. And in one of those, she had a situation where the DNA matches were double cousins.
Oh.
So, where 2 siblings from one family married 2 siblings from another family. And what that does is it doubles the amount of DNA that the matches share. So if your parents or your grandparents are in the, if they're one of those siblings where the 2 siblings married 2 other siblings of 2 different families. And so CeCe tells this part of the story in one of her cases. And I, maybe a month or 2 later, I was working on a case, and I just couldn't make sense of the amount of DNA shared. And all of a sudden I thought, wait a minute, are these people double first cousins?
Ah.
And so in that case, it was the adoptee who was a double first cousin. And, I know about double cousins. I'm a double cousin. My mom was had double first cousins. But, they're just I think so many things to think about that when you're looking at the amount of DNA shared, you're usually just looking at these standard tables that forget about double cousins for some reason. And so that was really helpful to me to see her have that issue come up.
Yeah. That is nice. And I'm sure that's why she probably showed that to you, but that's a really good thing to know. I missed that episode. Unfortunately, I'll have to go back.
Oh yeah, I think they're online too.
Oh, that's true. That's true. All right, guys. So be sure and follow along. You can follow Mary over at DNA Hunters. I'm at Are You My Cousin? Well, Are You My Cousin is my website. You can find it at lisalisten.com. Love for you guys to follow along on the summer road trip that I'm doing with FindMyPast. Well, it's a virtual road trip. One day we'll actually get to travel more and travel for real. So I will see you next week. Again, we'll talk genealogy next week. And I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.
Bye, thanks.